Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this impromptu IR35 Navigator recording in which we're going to discuss a topic that has been quite prominent in the news recently, subject of a BBC investigative piece on File on 4, namely mini umbrellas. And we have an expert on this with us today, the Chief Executive of IR35 Navigator and also Contractor Co-op, Mr. Chris Mattingly. Morning, Chris.
Good morning.
So, as mentioned, mini umbrellas, have been subject to quite a bit of negative press recently. But before we move on to talking about mini umbrellas, maybe Chris, you could tell us what an umbrella actually is and what it does.
Sure. Well, I guess firstly, there is no legal definition for an umbrella. But in essence, it's an employment business that sits in the contractual supply chain between a temporary worker and their end hirer. Its principal function is to employ and pay the temporary worker for the services that they provide to the end hirer. Umbrellas, however, do not tend to find work for their employees, and that's because the process of engagement tends to work in reverse. So when a business has a need for temporary workers, they will likely use a specialist recruitment agency to locate suitable workers for their requirement. When a suitable candidate is found, they will be offered a few options in terms of how they can be engaged and paid. The three most popular options that tend to be used would be that either the worker is engaged via their own limited company, and this is typically called a personal service company or a PSC, or they could join the payroll operated by the agency, or they could join an umbrella company. Now, when the work being performed is deemed to be that of disguised employment, which would commonly be referred to as inside IR35, the worker would most likely choose either agency payroll or umbrella. It then follows that most workers will choose an umbrella because they tend to offer slightly higher take-home pay rates when compared to the agency payroll rate. So this is by design, as most agencies do not want the admin burden that is created by operating agency payroll. Quite simply, they want to focus on what they do best, which is to find workers for their clients. They're also quite happy for the employment risk to sit with a third party, such as an umbrella. Now, typically, the agency will provide the worker with a list of their preferred or approved umbrella suppliers. The worker will then make their choice as to which umbrella they would like to join. And I think current estimates, if we look at the recent reports, suggest there are some 600,000 workers engaged by umbrella companies.
Okay, so all right, that's umbrellas. Thanks, Chris. So mini umbrellas, MUCs, as they seem to be referred to at the moment. How do they differ, if at all?
Well, I guess a bit as the name suggests, they're umbrellas as I've just described, but typically most umbrellas will have hundreds, if not thousands, of workers on their books. However, a mini umbrella will only have a handful. The directors of such companies are typically from countries such as the Philippines. And what we've seen recently in the press is that there are a large number of mini umbrellas abusing our tax system. The report last week suggested there were over 48,000 mini umbrellas in operation. And it seems their sole purpose is to take advantage of two government initiatives designed to support small businesses, and that is the employment allowance and the VAT flat rate scheme. So if you take the employment allowance as an example, currently this allowance provides small employers with a saving of up to £4,000 per annum on their national insurance bill. So this, the result of this, when you scale it up thousands of times, if you think about these 48,000 mini umbrellas, is that the exchequer and us, the taxpayer, are being cheated out of hundreds of millions in lost tax revenue. And then to add insult to injury, these mini umbrellas typically have a lifespan of about 18 months because they won't file their year-end accounts, and so eventually they'll get struck off from Companies House. And then in terms of going under, they typically leave a trail of debts to HMRC. So whilst they're an umbrella that serves no other purpose other than to sort of defraud us, the taxpayer. So they're not good.
Isn't there any legislation or proposed legislation that HMRC can use to pursue the directors of these fraudulent umbrellas?
Yeah, but in the context of what we're talking about here, if you think if you think you've got these 48,000 Filipino directors, they're pretty far away, and the reality is that they're not going to get anywhere in trying to pursue those directors that are based overseas. And of course, whether they're going to go for the directors that are originally around when the company was incorporated, I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the legal situation in terms of the fact that they're no longer directors because they've resigned and they've been essentially replaced by an overseas director. Have they committed a crime? I don't know. So okay. That's one for probably Tom to
Okay. Right. So it is possible for an umbrella that just because someone's offered an umbrella, it doesn't necessarily flag up there is something not quite right. There are legitimate umbrellas, and they're not all tax avoidance schemes. But if it is a mini umbrella, should that straight away flag up there is something wrong?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, mini umbrellas on the surface will appear like any other umbrella in terms of they are, doing all the normal things that you would expect an umbrella to do. Whilst there is the potential for a mini umbrella to be compliant, the belief is that mini umbrellas serve no other purpose other than to take advantage of our tax system. So there's no good reason for anyone to use a mini umbrella, but the problem is that many workers won't even realise that they're dealing with a mini umbrella. As I say, the operators of these schemes are very sophisticated. They know exactly how to present themselves to others in a way that appears totally legitimate. And what we've seen in the recent, as I say, press reports is that what's going on at the highest level appears to be entirely legitimate. But then as you get further down the supply chain, that's when the mini umbrellas are appearing, and I'm guessing there are clearly huge financial incentives for certain people in the supply chain to overlook the presence of the mini umbrella, and in reward for, as I say, some sort of commission or incentive, they're allowing this behaviour to go on.
Okay, so there is possibility that a mini umbrella could be functioning, and somebody might be incentivized not to ask questions about it. Wouldn't that not put the supply chain in jeopardy then?
It certainly would. Typically in these arrangements, the temporary worker is being paid correctly, and so they would be, unaware that anything was going on in the background. It might, however, be fair to say that anyone being employed by a mini umbrella is unlikely to receive their full employment rights in terms of entitlements such as statutory sick pay, accrued holiday pay, etc. I mean, if we take the BBC File on 4 programme, then that programme, which is very interesting to listen to, sets out how the COVID test, track and trace workers were recruited for a large, well-known outsourcing supplier working with government-approved suppliers. But again, here the problem came further down the supply chain, where these temporary workers were being moved from, mini umbrella to mini umbrella. So, here you've got a group of employees. It's payday. They receive their payslip, and they're seeing on their payslip that they're actually being paid by different employers. In each of these cases being, these mini umbrellas, and this is what led to a whole trail of mini umbrellas being uncovered.
Right. So, who would you say is being most exploited by these schemes?
Well, it's definitely us, the taxpayer, I think, overall, because so when you start scaling up the numbers, say it's running into hundreds of millions, that's really lost. It's lost tax revenue. So that's a key point there. So the workers themselves typically are being paid correctly in terms of if they're being recruited at £10 an hour, they are receiving their £10 an hour, and on the payslip, everything is being calculated correctly in terms of their, PAYE and national insurance. And so, from a net pay perspective, they're seeing their take-home pay as they would expect to see it for any, legitimate employer. As I say, it's what's going on behind the scenes, and the fact that these mini umbrellas are taking advantages of various government initiatives. That's where that's in principle where the main abuse is going on. And then further down the track, if these companies are being essentially run into the ground after 18 months, potentially you've got situations where they're not paying their debts to HMRC, because that's one of the principal responsibilities of an umbrella, is to make sure that not only the correct amount of tax and national insurance is being calculated, but it's also being paid across to HMRC. So it's a lose-lose situation for the taxpayer.
Okay. Is there any effect? I mean, we've spoken a lot our previous think tank sessions, when we've considered reputational risk and financial risk to end clients, to agencies. What's the fallout of these mini umbrellas for them?
Well, for the end client, I would say the reputational risk is probably the biggest factor for them. No business would wish to see themselves being reported in the press for assisting tax dodgers, or facilitating tax evasion. It doesn't make for very good headlines. And of course, if they were found guilty of such, there would be severe financial consequences as well. However, mini umbrellas, first and foremost, create a very uneven playing field for those that do operate compliantly. So, if they are essentially committing this tax abuse in the background, then they've got more financial resources to pay incentives to others. That will then lead to further fraud being committed. So, it's very easy for them to undercut the compliant umbrellas who are doing the right thing. And this gives the industry a bad name, because now everyone is being tarred with the same brush. Legitimate umbrellas are continually having to defend themselves against other people, and without proper regulation and oversight, these sort of bad actors have been allowed to penetrate the industry and give it such a bad name.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be difficult, isn't it, for anybody who's just looking in from the outside, and they just catch the headlines. As soon as you say umbrella or mini umbrella, they're just going to think, oh, it's something dodgy. It's something that they shouldn't be involved with. But when it comes to verifying whether an umbrella is a good umbrella or a bad player, whose responsibility is that?
Well, where we stand today, I would say, the whole supply chain really is responsible for making sure that everyone within that supply chain is legitimate. So it's no longer acceptable just to assume that everything underneath you in the supply chain is going to plan. It's a responsibility for everyone to make sure that they know who's in that supply chain, and that they're doing all the right things. The Criminal Finance Act 2017 has been a bit of a game changer in this, in that it makes it a corporate offence for failing to take adequate precautions to prevent tax evasion, both in the UK and overseas. So this should act as a strong deterrent to all parties in the supply chain, and means that everyone should be motivated to make sure their supply chain is legitimate and behaving compliantly.
So what would you suggest then, if that's what they need to do, then to protect themselves, what should they be looking to do, or who should they be looking to help them achieve this?
Well, those in the supply chain, typically working down from the end hirer to the bottom, to the worker, they need to make sure they know who they're dealing with. So exactly who is in the supply chain, who are the contractual parties, and then beyond that, they need to be confident that the correct amount of tax is being calculated and paid to the Treasury. So to achieve this, they need to apply some basic due diligence principles in terms of running background checks on the companies in the supply chain and its directors, checking that their documentation is legitimate. Things like, are they VAT registered? Not just relying on information that they've been given, but actually running the checks to make sure that they are registered and that the company names line up correctly. They should be requesting proof of compliance on key policies and procedures that each supplier should be following. There should be scope to perform spot audit checks on the flow of contract income from the top to the bottom of the chain. So, for instance, where an umbrella is involved, does the payslip and employment costs correctly account for the contract income that's being paid to the umbrella? There should be no, scope for any money to have been siphoned off on the side, for the purposes of tax avoidance. They should be able to make sure that everything adds up. Can the umbrella evidence the tax that's been collected? Has it been paid from their bank account to HMRC? Does the payment that's been made to HMRC line up with the RTI submission that would have been made through the payroll system? So I think there's some very sort of basic elementary checks that can be made there just to, satisfy everyone in the supply chain that the correct amount of tax is being calculated and paid.
Right. I mean, I'm stating the obvious here, but IR35 Navigator would carry out those checks for anybody who was signed up to the service. Be able to do that for multiple contracts or multiple things, is that something that only larger companies could achieve by themselves, or what would they need?
I think basic due diligence principles can be carried out by anyone of any company of any size. I mean, sure, it creates more of an admin burden, but the consequences of not doing it, particularly in the area of umbrellas at the moment, an industry that's not regulated. Everyone needs to have a look underneath the bonnet to make sure that everything is correct and in order. I mean, you can't just rely on everything appearing to be legitimate from the outside. I mean, sometimes, as I say, we've got 2 trade accreditations that exist for umbrellas. We've got professional passport, and we've got the FCSA, and I think probably across the 2 organisations, there's probably about 100 or so umbrellas who are currently accredited. But again, that's not enough. I mean, those in the supply chain should not be relying on what is essentially a badge. Yes, it's good to have the badge. It does demonstrate that the umbrellas have gone through some form of audits, but ultimately it needs to be conducted within the supply chain itself. You shouldn't be relying on someone else's assessment. And as I say, the checks that can be done are fairly straightforward in terms of just making sure that certain key information lines up. And certainly if it didn't, that would then create a very significant red flag in terms of probing deeper. But I think any compliant umbrella will be more than happy to open up their books to in this way, in terms of being able to demonstrate to anyone in that supply chain that they're doing all the correct things. And of course, if they refuse to do so, then I guess that speaks for itself, and there's probably something funny going on. So
there seems to be a lot of other people who agree with you that it's not working. There have been calls by politicians. There's been a recent policy paper put forward saying that the whole industry of umbrellas should be regulated. Well, what's your view on that?
Well, I think it's pretty evident with where we are today and the amount of negative press around and feelings towards umbrellas that self-regulation clearly doesn't work. We need umbrellas to be recognised in law, and we need proper regulation to set out how a compliant umbrella should operate. I'm sure we'll cover this in a future session, but this week we've seen the release of a policy paper that highlights the current issues with the umbrella market and calls for regulation. A large number of people have got behind this, and we've even seen amendments being tabled to the finance bill yesterday to force the government to regulate and review this sector. That's sort of being discussed as we speak. So this has come about at just about the right time now in terms of we need this to happen, and many industry professionals, including myself, fully support the move for regulation. Once we've got the regulation, we can hopefully clean up the industry and put everyone onto a level playing field.
Okay. You've been running the Contractor Co-op for a while. What, just very briefly, the difference between your Contractor Co-op and what would be just an ordinary umbrella?
Well, I guess in principle, there is no, in terms of the functions of the business, in terms of what it does and the service that it provides, it's no different to any other umbrella. It sets out to achieve all the things that you would expect a compliant umbrella to achieve in terms of employing its workers under an overarching contract of employment, making sure that all the correct gross to net payroll calculations are conducted. So it operates exactly the same as any good and compliant umbrella should operate. But the key thing is the cooperative side of things, and that really is what that stands for, is that it's an employee driven business. It's employees have the opportunity to become members of the cooperative, and by being a member, they essentially have an equal voice in terms of deciding how that business is operated. But I guess the key thing it demonstrates is transparency. So as a member, they have access to see exactly how the business is being operated. There's nowhere to hide, and so I guess it would give those involved comfort knowing that that the business is being sort of operated firstly with their best interests at heart, but also that, as I say, everything that's going on is fully transparent.
Okay, that's interesting. So you actually would get more information just by being with a cooperative, and a more feeling of understanding what the day-to-day running was, how things were being paid out. You would know that, and you'd have more. Would you know, sort of speak to the other members at meetings and stuff? You'd be more involved in the running of the co-op, would you feel, if you were a member of a co-op?
Yes, like any employee-owned business, they're essentially their stakeholders. They have, as I say, they have a voice. They can collectively, determine what the future of the business is. If there is something that they don't like about the business, they can vote to change it. Essentially, the power is amongst the membership. It's not a business that is operated by a select few individuals for their own sort of personal gain. That's the key thing.
Excellent. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I don't have anything further to add. I think what we've seen recently is, as I say, a lot of negative sort of behaviour around the use of umbrellas, and of course, hopefully, what we've just talked about will help explain it. And yes, with progress towards regulation, hopefully the future will become a bit brighter for umbrellas.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm sure anybody listening would have found what you've said today really, really interesting and helpful. If you'd like to contact Chris to find out more about umbrellas and specifically Contractor Co-op, you're more than welcome to contact him. His details can be found on the Contractor Co-op website, as well as the IR35 Navigator website. Chris, what is the web address for the Contractor Co-op?
It is literally contractor.coop, as in COOP.
Great, thanks again, Chris. I'm sure, as you say, there will be many more further discussions about the policy paper and regulation of umbrellas to come, and possibly another IR35 Navigator session discussing this topic involving our expert panel in the not too distant future. Until then, take care.